Hello and welcome to a video clip response to the speech from the throne delivered yesterday, November 19th, from the Governor General. I attended this session in the Senate gallery. It is, of course, one of those great moments of reminding ourselves that this is a parliamentary democracy, a very different system from that in the U.S., and that, in fact, our head of state is the Governor General, and that the Prime Minister of Canada is supposed to work with parliamentarians on all sides of the House respectfully. Let's hope we see a real change of tone in this coming Parliament. Mr. Harper has been apparently putting out the signals that he wants to be a kinder, gentler version of himself. Let's hope that prevails, because certainly the last session of Parliament is one that no one would ever want to see repeated. That said, let me give you some of the details, the highlights, and the low points of the speech from the throne yesterday. For those of you who might not know, of course, although delivered by Michaëlle Jean, the speech is the product of Stephen Harper and the Conservative government that has now formed government as a minority. So I may, through this presentation, refer to the Conservatives said this or that, although I recognize that this speech was delivered by Her Majesty's representative in Canada, Michaëlle Jean. All right, well, what did the speech from the throne tell us? The advanced word had been that it would be mostly about the economy, nothing very dramatic. It was a surprise because it was much more substantive and, from the point of view of green philosophy, much more damaging than that we were led to expect. From the financial point of view, one of the first things said in the speech was that basically that Mr. Harper's breaking one of his election promises right off the bat. I remember well being in the debates, and the question was, are there any circumstances in which you would run a deficit? All the other federal party leaders said no, they'd never run a deficit. Being honest, I said that Greens were very determined not to run deficits, but given the global financial situation, one could foresee the time that you might have to run a deficit. As I said, one of the first things, I'm just looking for the exact quote that they said, was that, quote, it would be misguided to commit to a balanced budget in the short term at any cost, unquote. So right away we see that Mr. Harper's taking advantage of the global financial meltdown to cover for what we already suspected in the Green Party, that the mismanagement of the economy in the last 2.5 years was coming home to roost. We've seen the Harper government both cut taxes and increase spending. It doesn't take very much, it certainly doesn't take an economics degree to realize that when you cut taxes and increase spending, you are running the risk of a deficit. In fact, the Harper government has eliminated the surpluses that Canadians used to see, and at the same time was in the last quarter before the election flirting with running a deficit. Now we know that they are not going to feel constrained from running deficits. So that was maybe not surprising news, but I think certainly a bold breaking of a promise right off the bat from the speech from the throne. The other things the speech from the throne talked about, which are predictable, is that we need to work internationally to develop a new financial architecture. It's certainly very interesting that we now see a new group emerging, the G20, with more engagement from important developing countries in finding an international approach to maintain economic stability in a very interconnected planet. We've always been interconnected ecologically. We're increasingly interconnected economically as well, and we need a better system than that put in place at the end of the Second World War, known as the Bretton Woods system. We need to bring some new institutions to bear. We'll see how that goes moving forward. There's nothing suggested in the speech from the throne as to what direction Mr. Harper would take on that, merely that they know there will be international negotiations for the G20. They also talk about the need to expand our free trade agreements. This is a point of some interest, I think, to Canadians to know that much of what Mr. Harper promises is much less than meets the eye. Again, looking at the speech from the throne, we hear that trade negotiations have been concluded with the European Free Trade Association, Peru, Colombia, and Jordan. Now, lest you think the European Free Trade Association is the European Union, let's just clarify. The European Free Trade Association includes the following countries: Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland. Not taking anything away from how important it is that Canada have strong relationships with Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland, but it's a long way from the European Union. And as for the free trade agreement with Colombia, we're very concerned. Colombia has a very disturbing human rights record, has the worst case of abuses, particularly for trade union organizers of any country. We do not believe, and the Green Party has spoken out against this before, that we should be concluding a free trade agreement with Colombia without much more work going into ensuring that Colombia ensure the rights of workers and free trade trade union organizations to ensure that, as often happens, trade union organizers are murdered in Colombia without recourse and without the authorities pursuing that as a priority. So we need to see much more protection before pursuing those free trade agreements. We're not surprised that there's no mention of the need to renegotiate NAFTA.